guys, and welcome to the final lesson of our Middle East topic. Today we're going to be looking at going over all the work we've done so far on this unit in order to help you guys with the mini assessment I've also attached to this lesson. So on that point, there is a 10-question multiple choice quiz. My advice would be to finish this lesson or this video first before attempting it. You only get one attempt at the quiz. But without further ado then, let's go over some of the stuff we've done this half term. So it may feel like it's gone very quickly. We've actually studied quite a lot this half term in terms of the Middle East. We started off by looking at the location and the climate of the area. We then looked at the differences in population in the Middle East. And after we looked at the kind of population, location and climate, we then moved on to oil. So we first looked at how and why oil was important. Then we looked at how oil had benefited the Middle East, and then we studied Yemen as that case study, which essentially was why oil has not benefited every single area of the region. And so what we're going to do now is, I'm just going to kind of talk through each of those individual elements, and then that will help you to answer the mini quiz that you should be completing at the end of this lesson. So to start off then guys, this is a rather confusing map on the screen, but the green area just north, or 23.5 degrees north and above the equator, is the Middle East. The Middle East is not a continent. Okay, it is not a continent. It is parts of Europe, Africa, and Asia. The actual term the Middle East was made by the British, referring to the fact that it wasn't as far east as Asia, but it was further east than Europe, so the Middle East became an idea. Now, obviously, with that confusion, a lot of people always name the Middle East as that kind of eighth continent in the world, and it's not. So within the Middle East itself, we then looked at the different climate zones that exist. And I think a big misconception people have is that in the Middle East, it's all desert. When we think of the Middle East, we think of that desert, we think of the kind of the sand and the sand dunes. But that isn't strictly true. Parts of the Middle East in particular, in northern Turkey, have a Mediterranean climate. We have that semi-arid steppe as well. And also we have those highland climates as well in places like Iraq and Iran. So if you remember, those alpine biome regions were really, really important. Now, a biome was an area that shared similar natural vegetation, similar animals, and a similar climate. And so, in theory, if I went to any part of the desert in this part of the biome here, they would all share those same characteristics. Now, again, in the Middle East, generally speaking, it is hot and dry. Now, that's not always the case. There is a lot of mountainous regions where it is mountainous. Because the relief is so high, it tends to be colder and wetter, but generally hot and dry. But why is that? Well, it's because the Tropic of Cancer runs through the Middle East, and that's why the region is hot. In terms of its latitude, it is very close to the equator. But as I've said, as you go up the mountains, it does get cooler. You can actually find glaciers in the mountains of Iran and Turkey, which is a really weird concept when you think about the Middle East. You'll think of these kind of snowy different regions as well. And so on that point, what we then did was we then started to look at the population of the Middle East. And again, the population density in the Middle East is distributed as per the map on here. So this map on here is showing areas like in red where the population density is high, and areas in yellow where the population density is low. And we looked at those three reasons as to why the population is different. Firstly was the climate. So we looked at the idea that where the climate was milder, the population tended to be higher. We looked at the relief. So again, it is very difficult to build cities on areas with high relief. So where there are mountainous regions in the Middle East, the population density in particular tended to be lower because cities are built on flat land. And then linking directly with the climate, we also looked at water access as well. So large parts of the Middle East have very unequal access to water, and that is a very big problem. But there are also major rivers like the Nile. There are also major rivers throughout a place like Turkey as well. And so where there is greater access to water, there is a higher population density. Once we looked at the population, we then looked at this thing called oil, or to give its proper title, crude oil. And we know from the lessons rather, that oil is a really important factor, not just in the Middle East, but also around the world. So if we were to recap here, well, why do we actually care about oil? Well, firstly, oil is vital for our everyday life. Everything that we do relies on oil, and everything that we consider normal in some ways linked to oil. There might be the petrol for your car, there might be the plastic in your shopping bag, it might be the makeup you're using in the morning. The second reason is because oil is geographically rare, so that means that oil does not occur in every country, and therefore access it is a bit of a lottery, really. Some countries hit the geography jackpot in the sense that they had large oil reserves, whereas others did the complete opposite, and because they had quite small oil reserves, um, they've struggled to access the resource in an equal fashion. And then finally, oil has a very, very high value. And in fact, oil is actually referred to as black gold by a lot of prospectors. And it's referred to as black gold because the value of gold is very, very high, the price of gold is very, very high, and oil is the same idea. So again, the average price of a barrel of oil at the moment is about $50 to $58 a barrel. There are billions and billions of barrels of oil left in the ground, so you can understand exactly how much value the resource holds in today's economy. And then from that, talking about oil being geographically rare, the Middle East won that geography jackpot. They have some of the biggest oil reserves in the world, in particular Saudi Arabia, which has 264 billion barrels left. Kuwait, the UAE, Iran, and Iraq all have very, very large oil reserves. And so one would assume, therefore, that given that oil is known as black gold, the Middle East would have developed very, very strongly. And in some cases, that was absolutely true. In particular, the city of Dubai within the UAE. So, if we recall, in the 1950s, Dubai was a small pearl fishing and trading port with a good location. But then, when oil was discovered in 1966, Dubai's future changed quite dramatically. Dubai meant that the oil industry created lots of jobs, and all the oil money generated enabled Dubai to invest in schools, in hospitals, in new infrastructure. And then once Dubai had used the oil, they were very, very clever. And what Dubai did was they realized that they could not rely on oil for the long term. So instead, they had to diversify their income. And so now, only about 17% of Dubai's money comes from oil. There was a lot of buildings, a lot of tourism, and also Dubai is now an important place for technology. So Microsoft have a very large office in Dubai, and it provides an alternate source of income and jobs for the people that are living there. And then in contrast to Dubai, we looked at this place called Yemen. Now, the Yemen is a country with 9 billion barrels of oil in its reserves, but the income from oil contributes about 75% of its overall revenue. So whereas Dubai it's only 17%, in Yemen it's about 75%. But on paper, the Yemen should still have a fairly good chance at developing. The Yemen is an LIC. The UAE, which is where Dubai is, 50, 60 years ago was also an LIC, but their fortune has changed dramatically to now be classed as a HIC. So in theory, given that Yemen also has access to oil, one would assume that they would have a similar outlook or indeed a similar fate. Again, they invested quite heavily in oil infrastructure, so they built oil fields, they had oil pipelines, they had gas fields as well. And given the fact that the Yemen is on the coastline, it meant that they were able to export that quite easily via the sea. So, again, geographically speaking, on a physical geography level, the Yemen was very well placed to do well. It had natural oil reserves, it had access to water for trade, and it had very wealthy and powerful neighbours as well. And all those things geographically should lead to it doing very, very well as a country. However, oil did not benefit Yemen as much as did the UAE. And there are two main reasons for that: corruption and war. So if you recall, the Yemen is a very, very corrupt country. It's fraudulent. There's bribery. In fact, it is the fourth or fifth most corrupt country in the entire world. So very, very corrupt indeed. And the problem with corruption is that all the money from the oil that Dubai was using to invest in infrastructure, in schools, and in roads, Yemen weren't doing that. They were giving the money to the most wealthy people in society. They were handing out contracts. They were bribing people. They were selling the oil to foreign companies in return for big paychecks. And so essentially, what I'm trying to say here is that because of this idea of corruption, that the people in Yemen were not able to see the full benefit of the money from oil. Whereas in the UAE, they really use that money as a chance to kind of springboard them forward. In Yemen, they rely on it, but they haven't really used it to its full extent. And the second reason for that corruption is that if you recall as well, I told you about these ghost workers. So there was a survey, and this is absolutely baffling fact, that 1 in 3 of all workers in Yemen don't actually exist, but they still get a wage. So, for example, if there is a person who earns £10,000 a year from drilling oil, say there is a factory of 300 workers, 100 of them don't actually exist. There's only over 200 people there. But that also means that those 100 people are all getting paid £10,000 a year. So all that money might be going to the pocket of the factory owner, into the pockets of the government. So it's very, very corrupt. But perhaps most importantly was this idea of war. So Yemen has been at war for a very long time. The war is still going on. Britain, Russia, and the USA are all involved in Yemen. But essentially, the idea is that the country has been one big war zone now for the best part of a decade. And if you are at war, it is very, very difficult to develop. And so places like Dubai were able to develop quickly and efficiently. Yemen, because of civil war, was not able to do that. And it all links back to this idea of corruption because the government in Yemen was particularly bad, and therefore a lot of conflicts broke out. And now they've been at war for a very, very long time. So, rather than the normal 3 review questions, today's activities are a little bit different. Firstly, I'd like to complete the mini assessment on Satchel 1. It's 10 questions, you only get 1 attempt. It's really, really important that you read those questions carefully and you choose the answer that you genuinely think is the best. Don't just guess it, as the chances are you will get them wrong. Secondly, I'd also like to use this video to make a mind map or a vision poster which includes 10 pieces of key information about the Middle East. So it doesn't have to be a huge piece of work, but I want to take out 10 key pieces of information about the Middle East and then add them onto a poster or mind map. Once you've done that, can you please upload that to Satchel 1 as well? Any questions, please join the Zoom link and I will be free to give you any support that you need.